once or twice approached him in 2008 about fixing matches, allegations that he's always strongly denied. A couple of questions, Steph. Can you clarify why the apology from the MCC and payment of legal costs was necessary?
Well, because their error was in publishing, by putting on a website, a headline for the video clip, is my understanding. It's, of course, been withdrawn rather hastily, which said, basically, Ken's guilty, or implied Ken's guilty or involved in match fixing. If they had just said, McCullum stands by his evidence, that wouldn't have actually been what in the UK is a libel, what in New Zealand is a defamation. So Brendan McCullum can stand up and say the truth, which is I am standing by my evidence, and what I said in court was, I recall Ken's approached me in 2008. I believed he was asking me to match fix, or he was talking about match fixing. So McCullum can stand up and say what he understands to be the truth. What you can't stand up and say about that is anything that implies Ken's is guilty, because Ken's has never been found by a court to be guilty.
Why is that not libel?
To say that the truth, he approached me and talked to me, because that is the truth. McCullum swore on oath in court, I recall Ken's coming and talking to me. Now,
so it's his truth, in other words.
that is his truth, and it's his honest belief, which is also, if it's based on some evidence, a defence defamation. But somebody else reporting that and doing some sort of encapsulating headline that makes it sound like Ken's has actually been found guilty. Well, of course, Ken's, there was a civil claim by Ken's against the guy who originally tweeted the thing. Then it was that he was accused of perjury, and a perjury is a criminal offence, so it had to be proven beyond reasonable doubt. And the jury in that perjury case held that Ken's and his lawyer hadn't proven to that required high standard, that they had actually lied on oath. What McCullum is saying is, I stand by my evidence. Well, that's true for him. It's when you go and say that means, you draw an inference from that, which is that Ken's is guilty of match fixing, which is there's been no evidence to establish that in a court. He's never been found to have been involved.
Okay, so he can repeat his version as he understands it without perpetuating the defamation, in 1,000 after-dinner speeches.
Well, potentially, and I do hasten to add, I'm not a defamation specialist, but that is right. He can say, as I said in court, this is what I recall happening. Right. And note that Ken's has always been quite careful in what he's ever said about Brendan McCullum. Oh, you're a good guy. Well, he gave the evidence he thought was right, and I can't really say a lot about that. Yeah. But what somebody else can't say is, well, because McCullum keeps standing by his evidence, Ken's must be guilty.
Yeah. Here's this headline.
That's the defamation.
All right, and thank you, Steph. Steph Dyberg on the panel. Lavina, before we go, I've got to ask you, because you've been to the Olympic Games and reported on them, commentated on them, are we seeing the end of the Olympic Games era with what's happening in Rio and everything being said about it?
I wouldn't say this would be the last Olympic Games, but I think globally people are starting to realise that the Olympic Games is something that worldwide we can't afford. I've been to 3 Olympics, Jim. I went to Athens, Beijing and London, and I thought to myself the only solution to this might be in the future have 5 cities that host the Olympic Games throughout the world in different continents, and let other countries be the host nation by giving them free tickets and let them have a host support. But in the end, when it comes to costing, I think the Beijing Olympics was $44 million US to pay for. I think London was something like billion dollars US to pay for. Yeah. And it's money countries or globally, worldwide, we can't afford to pay anymore. And I just think the upheaval with the Russians being banned, and in terms of saying they'll have their own Olympic Games, and countries being too poor to host them, countries pulling out, cities pulling out of their nomination bid to host an Olympic Games, I think the writing's on the wall that the era of the Olympics is coming to an end, and we need to find a solution if we still want to celebrate the greatest sporting event in the world.
Yeah. There was an article that said that they blamed the LA Olympics on this. And said
for starting the whole commercialisation.
The whole thing. I think they've forgotten.
Yeah, it became commercial.
Olympics, which probably started, because that was the first one that was,
indeed,
caused boycotts because of the human rights issues and so forth.
And we will talk more about this. Peter Elliott and Lavina Good, thank you both so much.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Jim.
Nice to talk to you.
That is us today. The Checkpoint with John Campbell coming right up.
Kia ora everyone, I am John Campbell, and on behalf of our excellent team, haere mai, welcome to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Tau te maira, i hoa mai, he kōrero kei te haere, he kōpepa kei te karawhiua. Tonight, the Bennett dozen, 12 applicants have been paid the government's relocation grant of up to $5,000 to move out of Auckland. Housing providers tell us why Paula Bennett's scheme had almost no impact. AFCO takes the Meat Workers Union to court over its tweets. We speak to young people in South Auckland about whether Auckland's unitary plan gives them hope of home ownership, and find their issue is the obstacle of saving a deposit. Pharmac announces it will fund Gardasil vaccines for boys and chickenpox vaccines for all children. Christchurch bans freedom campers, and Wellington welcomes David Jones. An action-packed 89 minutes to follow, beginning with Katrina Batten and RNZ News.
Kia ora, good evening. Several Auckland councillors have unsuccessfully tried to exclude Māori representatives from the final debates on the city's unitary plan. At a council meeting today, Dick Quacks, Cameron Brewer and Mike Lee used research material provided by Lobby Group to suggest the Independent Māori Statutory Board might be compromised because of its involvement in hearings on the plan. Lee Short, who founded the Lobby Group Democracy Action, says he supplied the material.
We're writing to every councillor, and we're going to be writing to the council through our legal representatives, pointing out these conflicts of interest and pointing out to the fact that they shouldn't be participating in the decision-making at any level where they have conflicts of interest.
Lee Short. The council voted 13-8 to keep deliberations on the plan with the Development Committee, which includes the Māori members. President Barack Obama has given a ringing endorsement of Hillary Clinton's bid for the presidency. He told the Democratic Party's convention in Philadelphia this afternoon there has never been anyone more qualified to serve as president. He also took aim at Donald Trump's promise to make America great again, saying America is already great. After Mr. Obama's speech, Mrs. Clinton joined him on stage, where they hugged, clasped hands and waved to the crowd. 2 hours earlier, Vice President Joe Biden delivered a blistering denunciation of Mr. Trump.
His lack of empathy and compassion can be summed up in a phrase I suspect he's most proud of having made famous: "You're fired." I mean, really, I'm not joking. Think about that. Think about that. Think about everything you learned as a child, no matter where you were raised. How can there be pleasure in saying you're fired?
Joe Biden speaking at the Democratic Party convention today. The Social Housing Minister says the government's grant relocation scheme is off to a good start. Under the scheme introduced a month ago, people in or waiting for social housing in Auckland are being offered up to $5,000 to move out of the city. 12 applicants have so far received the grant, and another 10 have had their grants approved but have yet to finalise their move. Paula Bennett says some applicants have been given more than $5,000.
I believe that a couple of them it's been more than 5,000. That was always, there may be exceptions, and particularly if they're moving a long way away and have to have furniture be moved there, but in general they're coming in at under $5,000.
Paula Bennett says the recipients include 4 people over 65 and some single mothers. A Waikato man who recklessly ill-treated bobby calves has been given home detention and community work. Noel Erickson was sentenced in the Huntly District Court today on 10 charges laid by the Ministry for Primary Industries. They relate to the treatment of 115 calves at a Te Kaupata slaughterhouse last August. Andrew McRae was in court.
Erickson kicked and hit calves, threw and dropped them onto a concrete floor and dragged one under a gate. Judge Marilena Burnett says that was outside any job description, and Erickson had received inadequate training. Her starting point in sentencing was 3 years in prison, but she allowed a discount for his guilty pleas and a lack of supervision by his employer. Erickson's been banned from owning an animal for 3 years and told that if he does an extra 100 hours community service on top of the 200 ordered, he'll only have to serve 9 months home detention. This is Andrew McRae.
Pharmac says savings it's achieved have enabled wider access to the costly Gardasil vaccine. It will fund the human papillomavirus or HPV vaccine from January for all children, not just girls, and adults up to the age of 26. It will also vaccinate against nine than the current 4 strains of the infection. The agency's Director of Operations, Sarah Fitt, says it's been working on this for a long time.
It's a complicated package, and in fact this isn't even all of it. There's actually still another 6 vaccines part of this package that we're still working on. So what we've been able to do is on some of the vaccines we've been able to get some quite good savings, and then that then enables us to widen access in other areas and introduce new vaccines.
Sarah Fitt of Pharmac. To sport, and the signs aren't good for the Hurricanes that captain Dane Coles will be fit in time for Saturday's Super Rugby semi-finals against the Chiefs. Coles, who has a rib injury, has been bracketed in the starting lineup with Ricky Riccatelli. He took part in training today and avoided contact work.
There's no point me being 50%. I'm no good to anyone if I'm there. I want to be 90 or 100, and I've got full confidence in the guys behind me. Ricky and Lenny will do the job as well.
Dane Coles. Bowden Barrett also missed training today because of illness, but he's expected back tomorrow. Meanwhile, the Wallabies player Digby Ioane has signed up with the Crusaders for 2 years. The New Zealand-born Australian-raised winger has already played 86 Super Rugby games, mostly for the Queensland Reds. Lydia Ko's putting to bed her near misses at recent majors as she prepares to tee off at the British Open later tonight. Ko led the last 2 majors at some point during the final round, but failed to go on to win.
Just to be able to play in major championships, going down in the last group and to be in contention, I think there's always a lot to learn from that.
Lydia Ko. The New Zealand cricketers are likely to take 2 spinners into tonight's first test against Zimbabwe, with the Bulawayo wicket expected to be flat and not offering much. After a good performance against Zimbabwe, leg spinner Ish Sodhi is likely to join Mitch Santner in the playing 11. That's the news.
Labour Greens friction.
The next Labour-led government won't be taking any measures to sort of interfere in prices that it has never ever controlled before, which is house prices. The central government simply doesn't do that.
Unitary plan discord.
We don't want to freeze time, but wiping out the past is not the responsible approach.
Calling in the hackers.
Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing. I think you will probably be rewarded mightily by our press.
Rough and tumble. Susie Ferguson and Guy Aspinall, morning reports, weekdays from 6. Then on 9 to noon, the young New Zealand-born student Roxanne El Hadi, who's won the UK 2016 Scientist of the Year award. And after 10, NASA researcher, entrepreneur and Frisbee champion Katie Forth. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow, Northland to Kapiti Coast, including Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. Showers, some heavy with hail and possible thunderstorms, easing and becoming isolated south of Whanganui in the morning and elsewhere later. Snow about the Desert Road in the morning. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, mainly fine but isolated showers spreading from the ranges at times. Wellington and Wairarapa, isolated showers, possibly heavy in the north today, retreating to coastal Wairarapa tomorrow. Western Nelson, Buller, Westland and Fiordland, periods of heavy rain with squally thunderstorms and hail until morning. Snow lowering to 200 metres in Fiordland overnight. For the remainder of Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, mainly fine but isolated showers till this evening. Otago and Southland, fine at first, showers with cold southwesterlies spreading north overnight and snow lowering to 200 metres, then clearing from the north later tomorrow. And the Chatham Islands, periods of rain with some heavy with hail tomorrow, gale southwesterlies tomorrow. You can cough now.
Sorry, Katrina.
It's 5:09.
I don't need to cough now. Sorry for coughing over the Chathams. A total of 12 people have been paid out of a government grant to move from Auckland to the regions. In June, the government started offering one-off cash incentives of up to $5,000 to help free up housing in Auckland and fill empty stock elsewhere. Well, since the policy was launched, 12 people have moved. 6 applicants were in social housing, meaning the policy has freed up a total of 6 Housing New Zealand houses. The Social Housing Minister, Paula Bennett, is happy with progress.
Oh, look, it's very early days and, I think sort of 20 people that have signed up and 12 of them already moved in a few short weeks is a good result. At the end of the day, this doesn't suit everybody, but for those that it does, we've had to go through a process where we interview people, we make sure they've got the supports, we then have to help them find somewhere to live, and then they have to physically move. So I'm quite pleased with the results to date. Been a variety of people that have looked at it. So we had one person that was really truly homeless, if you like. Others, 4 of them were in emergency housing. The woman that I was talking about was in Chicago. She was in social housing herself and was looking for a change. So we've had some that have been coming off the wait list, and we've had some that have been moving that are actually currently in social houses in Auckland.
Paula Bennett. The policy was announced by the Minister at the end of May and came into effect on June 20. And while Ms Bennett maintains it wasn't a throw together, it came as a surprise to the Minister of Housing New Zealand and Finance, Bill English. The Monte Cecilia Housing Trust isn't convinced the policy is as successful as Paula Bennett claims. The Trust spokesman, Bernie Smith, says the number is hardly groundbreaking.
I thought in the first month, that's when I would have thought the numbers would be 4 or 5 times this number. I'd say it would be declining now unless people are looking for opportunities where the government can assist them in making that move to another location. My hope is that the 12 families that have gone into communities where there is community and family networks so that they can sustain their new location. But as far as freeing up 12 properties for those that are homeless and still on the wait register, it's not even a pinpoint in the whole scheme of things. The Minister was originally talking about 150 families.
Yeah, there was something that 130, I believe, had shown an interest.
Yeah, so we've got a hang of a long way to go. And I'm not sure how they're going to promote it further to get the numbers anywhere near that. And if we've got 12 in the first month, we're probably lucky to get another couple of dozen between now and Christmas at this rate.
That's Bernie Smith of the Monte Cecilia Housing Trust talking to our reporter Alex Ashton. The Salvation Army's Pam Waugh agrees the take-up is low.
What we find for the majority of the families we work with, their connections are around that particular area. So say it's South Auckland. They've got their family, they've got their schooling bases, they've got their community. And so uprooting them from that is a big ask, especially when they're not going to anywhere they know. So, yeah, I'm interested in why the number is quite low. But if it's working well for people, it did. We couldn't see a huge amount of our clients taking that up.
The Salvation Army's Pam Waugh. It's coming up to 30 minutes past 5. Let's turn now to a very 21st century stoush between the Meat Workers Union and the Tallies-owned meat processing company, AFCO, about what the union can post on Twitter. AFCO says some of the union's tweets are untruthful and derogatory and breach the duty of good faith. The union says, nope, that's nonsense. The dispute is heading to the employment court. Here's our employment reporter, Max Toll.
According to the decision, there are 32 tweets AFCO is unhappy with, including some that criticise the Tallies Group owner and managing director, Sir Peter Talley. They were posted last year and early this year and are still public. This one is from union organiser Darian Fenton last June.
Hey Tallies, you don't need workers to bow to your every command. Threats and bullying when workers speak out won't stop them. Hashtag Sir Talley.
This is another, again by Miss Fenton, again in June last year.
Knowing HM Queen as I do, I don't think one would approve the hashtag Sir Peter Talley knighthood if she knew his serfs would suffer. Hashtag Jobs That Count.
The union-owned website jobsthatcount.com tweeted this in December.
Lots of calls coming in from AFCO Tally workers underpaid and ripped off by Tallies in first pay since court win. Hashtag Get Your Shit Together Tallies.
AFCO isn't happy, and the case will head to the employment court later this year. It first had to go through the Employment Relations Authority, which found any public comments about Sir Peter Talley and his knighthood could potentially undermine his position. Darian Fenton says if AFCO is successful, it would have a chilling effect and essentially gag the union.
We use social media to raise money for the Wairāwa workers who were locked out for 5 months. If this were to succeed, that would mean this company could seek compliance to have any social media fundraising removed.
She says AFCO is being hypocritical.
We've had 18 months of hell for workers where they've been locked out, where bargaining's broken down. You can't say, well, we've all got to be nice about this when a company doesn't come to the relationship with clean hands.
Ms Fenton says the union is always careful when commenting online. Meanwhile, she says the long-running collective bargaining dispute between the two sides shows no signs of ending and will inevitably need court intervention. For Checkpoint, Max Toll.
Tens of thousands of cases of chickenpox a year may become a thing of the past because of a major funding announcement today. The country's drug buyer, Pharmac, says from July next year, a vaccine to prevent chickenpox will be free for children. And that wasn't the only announcement from Pharmac today. Our health correspondent, Karen Brown, reports.
Pharmac says access to the chickenpox or varicella vaccine will be widened to include one dose for all children at 15 months and a catch-up dose later at 11 years for those who had not been vaccinated or who had not had chickenpox. A Warkworth GP, Kate Baddock, says the common childhood disease is both miserable and potentially serious.
Chickenpox is usually a debilitating, miserable illness that can leave scarring. So even for that reason alone, it's worth being able to vaccinate. But also there are some very much more significant and life-threatening complications of chickenpox.
Dr. Baddock says complications can include a kind of pneumonia and encephalitis or a chickenpox infection of the brain. The research director of the Auckland University's Immunisation Advisory Centre, Helen Pertussis-Harris, says chickenpox in general is best avoided.
Every year there are about 55,000 cases of chickenpox in New Zealand and about 450 hospitalisations, and that includes some admissions to intensive care. So it can make people really sick. And now we can prevent it, which is great.
Until now, the chickenpox vaccine has only been free for high-risk patients, but it will now be available to all children as part of the free National Childhood Immunisation Schedule. In an equally significant move, Pharmac also announced it will upgrade and extend availability of the human papillomavirus or HPV vaccine. This vaccine, known as Gardasil, has been funded only for Year 8 girls to protect against cervical cancer, but from January next year it will be available for all children and adults up to age 26. Boys will be covered through the school-based vaccination program. Doctors have been pushing for this change to protect boys as well from oral and genital cancers associated with HPV. Dr. Baddock of the Medical Association says it's needed.
It's wonderful news because it will protect not only boys from HPV infection and related cancers, but it will also protect girls and women.
She says extending the age range to 26 will also enable many more people to have the highly regarded but expensive vaccine.
We are going to cover the young women who were missed when Gardasil was not readily available in this country and wasn't yet part of the program. So it's a catch-up on those older but still young women.
The new Gardasil vaccine will cover 5 extra strains of the disease and be given in 2, not 3 doses. Uptake among girls to date is just 60% though, and the Pharmac Operations Director Sarah Fitt admits it needs to be raised.
Hopefully with it being able for older children and for boys as well, that will help increase the uptake. But you're right, yeah, it would be good to see that uptake increase.
She won't discuss costs, but says negotiations across many vaccines brought trade-offs that enabled the extension of free Gardasil. For Checkpoint, Karen Brown.
Eighteen and a half minutes past 5. Coming up on Checkpoint, we ask young people in South Auckland if the new unitary plan gives them hope of home ownership. And we find the biggest issue for many of them is just simply saving a deposit. Christchurch bans freedom campers forever. And Wellington welcomes David Jones with open arms and, by the sound of things, open wallets. We'd love to hear from you in any way you choose. You can text us on 2101. You can email us, checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. And, of course, we are on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you for being with us on RNZ National. We turn now to the unitary plan. And as Auckland's councillors assess their response to it, as the government expresses general support for it, and as Aucklanders themselves attempt to work out what it means for them and what they think of it all, a group of councillors has failed in a bid to exclude Māori representatives from the final debate over it. 3 councillors, using material supplied by the lobby group Democracy Action, argued members of the Independent Māori Statutory Board had conflicts of interest that could disqualify them. Why and what happened next? Here's our Auckland correspondent, Todd Niall. Two members of the statutory board sit on the council's Auckland Development Committee, which has led the unitary plan process. A move was made at today's council meeting to shift next month's debate signing off of the development blueprint to the full council governing body, where Māori board members don't sit. Ōrākei councillor Cameron Brewer pointed the finger at the statutory board after describing as a witch hunt the raising of possible conflicts of interest involving fellow councillor Sharon Stewart.
I just want to seek assurance, if we're going to play a level playing field, Mr Chair, that legal advice will also be given, pro-offered, to the 6 IMSB members that are senior office holders of trusts and iwi authorities that have submitted on the unitary plan.
Councillor Dick Quacks continued the line against Māori participation.
The problem that I have, apart from the conflicted position that the independent Māori statutory board have, is that it defies democracy to have people who are unelected, who are not accountable, sitting in judgment of a plan which is of huge importance to Auckland.
Councillor Mike Lee also questioned the appropriateness of statutory board members voting. The material used to question the statutory board's right to vote was supplied by the lobby group Democracy Action. Its founder Lee Short says he'll be monitoring the statutory board for conflicts of interest.
They've been deeply involved in the process all the way along, and therefore they shouldn't be allowed to make a submission and then be in judge of that submission process.
Did you email that research to all of the councillors prior to today's vote?
No, just some of the councillors that we've been working with.
Councillor Kathy Casey was one of the majority who argued it was proper for next month's consideration of the plan to include the Māori representatives, saying their voice was important.
Do not say no at this late stage, because I actually think this debate is insulting to them. And I'm sure they're all watching. David, I'm sorry for this debate.
RNZ News this week published a submission made to the hearings panel by Councillor Sharon Stewart, in which she described possible requirements to consult with Māori as a form of economic and social apartheid. She was one of the minority today who voted against statutory board members having a continued role. This was in spite of advice offered a short time earlier by the Council's governance director that councillors who had made such submissions should consider whether they are conflicted and should not have voted today. The chair of the Māori Statutory Board, David Taipari, doesn't believe he and fellow member Leanne Namani have conflicts of interest, and if any declarations are needed, they'd be made at next month's meetings. The formal sign-off will be taken by the governing body after the committee deliberations. I Tāmaki Makoro mō te hōtaka o te ahi ko Todd Niall tēnei. The unitary plan is designed to increase home ownership by increasing supply, of course. Increased supply stems rising prices. But if you're a low-income worker or even earning somewhat higher than that, another issue in Auckland is saving a deposit. How do you do that when you're spending almost everything you earn simply to pay the rent and to get by? During lunch hour today, I went to Westfield Mall in Manukau to ask. What's your name?
Mark.
Nice to meet you, mate.
Nice to meet you too.
How old are you?
22 years. Yeah, 22 years.
And Mark, you've got a job?
Yes.
Don't tell me who with, because we don't want to get your employer in trouble, but it's a good job?
Oh, definitely a good job, yeah.
Good man.
I've never been in a place that pays overtime, you know, and you know, they give me lunch and clean uniforms, so I'm happy there. Yeah.
That sounds cool.
Oh, it's awesome. I'm enjoying it. I just wake up, go to work, and finish work, come home.
So where do you, sorry, don't tell me where you work. Where do you live? Do you live in a rented place or a family home or a place you own?
In a housing home.
Housing New Zealand?
Yeah.
And how much a week do you pay for that?
Oh, not me, but so I don't actually have a place I stay at. Like, you know, I'm kind of moving around. But so I'm there with family, then I'm there with my bros, then I'm there with my cousins, and yeah.
And why are you moving around? Why do you move around?
It's a lot more cheaper. Yeah, to be honest. Yeah, it's pretty hard to find a place that you have to pay, you know, private and stuff. So. Yeah.
Hello. Hello. I'm John.
Hi.
Nice to meet you. What's your name?
Lotu.
Nice to meet you, Lotu.
Nice to meet you too.
How old are you?
I'm 25.
And what do you do?
I work at Air New Zealand.
Good job.
Yeah.
What do you do there?
Oh, we just clean the planes.
Everyone I interviewed had a job, work they're grateful for and seem to enjoy. But for the most part, their issue is that by the time they've paid the rent and the bills, saving for a deposit is almost impossible. In many cases, there's almost no money left over at all. In fact, Mike was the only person I met who'd bought their first home in Auckland in the past 5 years, and
I had to go away and work. I had to work overseas for 4 years, go and work in the mines, and made my money and came home.
Were you in Western Australia?
Yeah, I was.
And you just save every penny, did you?
Well, I tried to save every penny, but with the help of my wife as well. We couldn't have done it with on one wage, even working, making big money in Australia. You know, it took my wife as well to make money over here as well for us to save enough for a deposit for a house, yeah.
And the only other person I met who'd bought a home anywhere in the past 5 years was Rena. Do you own a home?
In Australia.
So how do you own a home in Australia?
It's cheap.
Where is it?
York, WA.
And how much did you pay for it?
$250.
That's extraordinarily good value. And what did you get for that?
3-bedroom house, big backyard.
$250,000 for that. Can even the unitary plan provide homes in Auckland for that little? Hello. Hello. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Are you the manager?
I am. I'm the restaurant manager for Texas Chicken in Manukau.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Good job.
That's awesome.
Do you own your own home?
No, not yet.
You going to one day?
Oh, well, yes, definitely. Definitely.
Thank you for having me in your shop. What lovely,
Yeah,
thank you. What lovely staff you've got. You are. Oh, thank you. Hold on, I'm just going to have my photo taken. Alice, you're a shift leader.
Yes, I am.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Do you own your own home?
No, sir. Can't afford it.
How much do you pay a week in rent?
Too much.
Yeah. So can you save money to buy a home?
No.
And that's the issue, is it the deposit, getting the deposit?
Always. We have no deposit. There's no way I could afford a deposit for a house.
We have our home. Your work is your home. Raylene, so I met you before, right? You're 38?
Yes.
And do you own a home?
No.
Are you able to save a deposit?
No.
How much do you pay a week in rent?
Like $480.
$480 a week?
Yeah.
And that's after tax income, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So how much do you have left over?
Well, between me and my husband, not much. Just enough to pay the bills, get by. Not enough to actually save up for a deposit for a proper house. Yeah.
Texas Chicken was buzzing. There were 10 people there working hard. So I asked them if they owned their own home themselves or their family owned their own home, to widen the issue out. Even with a mortgage or a family home, can you put your hand up? So there's 10 people. So Chantel, as the manager, I want you to testify to the fact that there's 10 people here and none of them put their hands up.
Yeah, no one owns their own home here. No one at all.
So the 2 people I met of over 20 people I spoke to who owned homes had either worked in Australia or bought in Australia. For everyone else, the answer was...
No.
Do you rent?
No, I bought with my sister who rents.
And then I met this woman. We'll call her C. Do you have a job?
Yes.
Good job?
Yes, a good job. I love my job. Yes.
Congratulations. And so do you live in a... How old are you?
I am 33.
Right. And do you live in a rented home or a home you own?
Rented home, of course.
Of course.
Yes. Around South Auckland, yeah, majority of the people don't own their home, so yeah, just another statistic, I suppose.
How much do you pay a week in rent?
$480.
$480.
And that's just the rent. That's not including power, water, everything else.
C called herself another statistic, and maybe she is, but she's a paid worker and a mother too. She hopes the unitary plan will lower house prices, but saving a deposit is the thing for C. There's nothing left to do it with. So is it tough to get by in Auckland?
Absolutely, yes, definitely. Definitely tough. I mean, there are days that I cry myself to sleep, but, kids don't know. They think that, we've got a house, food on the table. That's amazing.
There are days that you cry yourself to sleep because of money?
Yep, because of money issues. Can't keep the rent, struggling, can't put food on the table. But hey.
You got a job?
I've got a job. I've got 2 jobs. Yeah, and still struggling.
You got 2 jobs?
2 jobs, yeah.
So roughly how many hours a week do you work?
About 50 hours a week. And just scraping by 600. So, just scraping.
What do you mean? Explain that to me.
So, yeah, just rent, power, water, food, and then on top of that, kids' fees, just everyday living, as well as, trying to treat my kids every now and then, lunch. So, yeah, it's hard. It is.
That was C, one of the people I spoke to at the Westfield Mall in Manukau today. So the consensus was, whilst they hope the unitary plan will bring prices down on the supply side, actually the issue for a lot of those people who are on low to medium incomes is simply getting enough money aside to save a deposit. Coming up on Checkpoint, US President Barack Obama gives a rousing old speech at the National Democratic Convention. Huge reception for him. A Waikato man is sentenced to home detention and community work for willfully and recklessly ill-treating bobby calves at a pet food plant. And children's charity Kids Can says it's now distributing general hygiene packs to schools as an increasing number of families are unable to afford things like deodorant, soap, shampoos and so on. But first, here's Katrina Batten with RNZ Headlines.
Several Auckland councillors have unsuccessfully tried to exclude Māori representatives from the final debates on the city's unitary plan. At a council meeting today, Dick Quacks, Cameron Brewer and Mike Lee used research material provided by a lobby group to suggest the independent Māori statutory board might be compromised because of its involvement in hearings on the plan. The council voted 13-8 to keep deliberations on the plan with the Development Committee, which includes the Māori members. 12 applicants have so far received a government grant to move out of Auckland. Under the scheme introduced a month ago, people in or waiting for social housing there are being offered up to $5,000 to move out of the city. 12 applicants, 6 actually in social housing, have so far received the grant. Another 10 have had their grants approved but have yet to finalise the move. President Barack Obama has given a ringing endorsement of Hillary Clinton's bid for the presidency. He's told the Democratic Party's convention in Philadelphia there has never been anyone more qualified to serve as president. Pharmac is widening access to the Gardasil vaccine for several forms of cancer. It will fund the human papillomavirus or HPV vaccine from January for all children, not just girls, and adults up to the age of 26. The chickenpox vaccine will also be funded for all children. A Waikato man who admitted ill-treating bobby calves has been given 10 months home detention and 200 hours community work. And an argument between the Meat Workers Union and AFCO tallies over what the union can post on social media is heading to the Employment Court. Those are the headlines. I'll be back at 6 with more news, sport and weather.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. Let's turn to business news now with our business editor, Giles Beckford. Just in from Michelle. That's a new jacket, Giles, isn't it? A shopping frenzy. You look very smart wherever you bought it from. The Financial Markets Authority, the FMA, is putting out guidelines on what it regards as acceptable for behaviour for companies and people involved in the finance sector.
They are indeed. They're just starting to flex their muscles a wee bit, the FMA. Remember, they are now the sheriff of the financial markets. They're looking after investment companies, superannuation companies, the advisors who give investment advice. And so they're starting to say, we expect to see certain levels of behaviour. And from their point of view, they're putting out these guidelines, which they hope companies will start to abide by and people who are working for the companies will abide by. Essentially, it says the customers will come first. That's the bottom line for them, and that the companies who are offering financial services or products should be transparent about things such as commissions, the way they market the products, the training of their staff. So all in all, it's seeking to raise the level of behaviour, the better behaviour for consumers and treatment of consumers. It's just discussion at the moment. It's not prescriptive. In other words, they're not rules and regulations. But the FMA says if when it starts to visit companies it finds that they're not living up to these sorts of guidelines, then it might get a little bit grumpy. And from that point of view, it says if people in fact start breaching the legal sanctions that are there, then perhaps they just won't find that there's too much tolerance of their behaviour. So it's a good step, but they're draft at the moment.
And they're asking for feedback, right?
They are indeed on the FMA website, and they want feedback by October the 31st. So plenty of time there. Read them through. Consumers will be the beneficiaries.
Thanks, Giles. The NBR Rich List, the annual Rich List, is out today.
I've got it here, John. There it is. There, most important, of course, it's one of the Bible of wealth for this country.
Yes, and who's on it? The usual suspects?
Well, it goes without saying. Graham Hart is at the top. Only worth $7 billion this year. He's had a wee bit of a hit. He's down $2 billion on last year. And that reflects the fact that his companies or his broad empire is in fact quite heavily debt laden. And from that point of view, it impinges on his wealth. Other names there, we've got Richard Chandler, who's a Singapore-based investment guru. He's worth $4.2 billion. The top 8 people are all billionaires, and they're worth about $20 billion.
Wow.
And then there are 190 people on the list overall. They're worth about $60 billion. And I have to say, and the Prime Minister is there. He comes in around 175 with, I think, $60 million. There are some newcomers, and I have to say I was a little bit surprised to see some people who I don't really know, and I don't know where they're getting their money from.
There's a picture of me in there.
You're
joking.
You go. Well, it's the Bible of wealth, and you wouldn't distrust it, would you?
What does it say? Hold on. What does it say beside me?
It says, sources of finance unknown, questionable.
Thoroughly questionable, as is my very presence in that august periodical. To goodness gracious. Take us to the markets, Giles.
We might, just for the sake of legality, say that we think that bit was added not by the NBR people. Possibly. Not saying anything, no names, no pactrol. The markets.
I just about had a myocardial infarction.
I'm sure you can get something for it, but you won't get it on the share market, which was up just a handful of points, 73.06. New Zealand dollar, 71.1 US cents, 94.5 Australian.
Giles, just before Vernon Small puts in an OAA about what I'm paid, can we just sorry. Thanks very much indeed, Giles Beckford, our business editor, live from Wellington. Day 3 of the Democrats' National Convention in Philadelphia has seen a rousing speech from Barack Obama and the American Vice President Joe Biden, launching a blistering attack on the Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump. Joe Biden lauded the Democratic presidential nominee Hillary Clinton as a fighter who cares for struggling families. In an intensely personal speech, he had the delegates in the palm of his hand as he outlined the dangers of a Trump presidency, both internationally and at home in America. But it was President Barack Obama who rounded off the evening with a 45-minute speech ranging widely and optimistically across international and domestic affairs. It was grade A American patriotism, delivered as only Obama can do it, and touching on the idealisms that run deep in, the American politics of the people who want to be re-elected.
America is already great. America is already strong. And I promise you, our strength, our greatness, does not depend on Donald Trump. In fact, it doesn't depend on any one person. And that, in the end, may be the biggest difference in this election. The meaning of our democracy. Ronald Reagan called America a shining city on a hill. Donald Trump calls it a divided crime scene that only he can fix. It doesn't matter to him that illegal immigration and the crime rate are as low as they've been in decades, because he's not actually offering any real solutions to those issues. He's just offering slogans, and he's offering fear. He's betting that if he scares enough people, he might score just enough votes to win this election.
And in a rousing finale, Obama spoke not to the delegates, but directly to the American people.
And tonight, I ask you to do for Hillary Clinton what you did for me. I ask ask you to carry her the same way you carried me, because you're who I was talking about 12 years ago when I talked about hope. It's been you who fueled my dogged faith in our future, even when the odds were great, even when the road is long. Hope in the face of difficulty, hope in the face of uncertainty, the audacity of hope. America, you've vindicated that hope these past 8 years. And now I'm ready to pass the baton and do my part as a private citizen. So this year, in this election, I'm asking you to join me to reject cynicism and reject fear, and to summon what is best in us to elect Hillary Clinton as the next president of the United States and show the world we still believe in the promise of this great nation.
Barack Obama on fire. It's 22-6. A Waikato man has been given home detention and community work for willfully and recklessly ill-treating bobby calves at a pet food plant in Te Kaupata last August. 38-year-old Noel Erickson was today sentenced in the Huntly District Court to 10 months home detention and 200 hours of community work. The maximum sentence for the charges was 5 years jail and a $100,000 fine. Our Waikato reporter Andrew McRae was at the sentencing and joins us now. Welcome, Andrew. What were the nature of the charges?
Good evening, John. There were 10 charges all up, and some were representative, and they only account for a 2-day period back in August last year, and that was the 2 days that the Farm Watch, the animal rights group, had secretly videoed what was going on in the pet food plant at Te Kaupata. MPI, the Ministry for Primary Industries, was given the video. It was widely circulated, of course, and that's how the charges eventuated. They're all animal welfare charges, and it's all relating to the way the animals were treated when they came to the pet food plant in August, and they were, Erickson caused them serious injury, certainly pain and distress, and of course with bobby calves, only a couple of days old. And without going into too much detail, Erickson was working with the calves. They'd just been trucked into the plant. He used a lot of force on them. He kicked and hit the calves, dragged across concrete floor, dropped them on the floor, pushed some under a gate and over a gate, things like that. And really, in one case, he actually also put a calf onto a hook before it was actually dead.
Erickson admitted the charges, obviously. What did his lawyer say about why all this happened?
Well, he claimed that management at the plant had directed and condoned what he was doing. He also claimed that there was very little training given, no instructions about animal welfare laws. He also said that the equipment he was using was not suitable for the job. Erickson, through his lawyer, told the judge that he now appreciates the trauma and the pain the animals were going through. He regrets his actions, and he said initially he didn't want to do it, but he had a family to provide for, and he was worried about losing his job.
What did the judge say, Andrew?
Judge Marilena Burnett, she supported the view that he had been given inadequate training, also that the management hadn't supervised him, so she supported his views on that. She described the calves as newborn and very vulnerable. With her sentencing, she had the starting point of 3 years in jail, but then she gave him a discount of 25% because he pleaded guilty to the charges. She also took off time because she did believe that he wasn't adequately supervised and had very little instruction given to him before he started the job. She came down to about a 22-month period. That fitted in with the period allowed for home detention. The pre-sentence report from probation had recommended home detention, so she basically picked that up and gave him 10 months home detention. But she did say that if he served another 100 hours on top of his 200 hours community work, she would reduce that 10 months down to only 9 months home detention.
Our Waikato reporter Andrew McRae, who was at the sentencing, thank you very much indeed. Andrew. It is 16 minutes to 6. Children's charity KidsCan says it's facing an increased need from schools to provide hygiene packs for students in low decile schools, with parents unable to afford deodorant, soap, toothbrushes and so on. Yesterday we brought you the story of Labour MP Louisa Wall teaming up with the Salvation Army and the Countdown supermarket chain in a call for consumers to donate feminine hygiene packs for vulnerable young women and families in need who simply can't always afford them. But KidsCan's health manager, Julia Hayden-Carr, says the issue is much wider than sanitary products.
So schools came to KidsCan and said one of the things that they were really struggling with was meeting the needs of girls that were coming to school without sanitary products. So we've been providing them now for nearly a year, and I can tell you that we've provided about 4,000 packets in the last 3 months.
4,000 packets of tampons?
Tampons and other sanitary products.
And who is paying for those? Where is the money coming from for that?
So we were really lucky to get a one-off grant from the Ministry of Social Development for that period of time, and so we're just coming to the end of that funding now, so we'll be looking for more funding going forward.
And how many schools are you working with?
So we provide this to all our schools, so there's now 568 schools supported by KidsCan, and because girls start having their periods much younger these days, 8 is not unusual, all our schools, primary, intermediate and high schools, can get products off us.
But in terms of hygiene products, personal hygiene, this isn't the only demand that you're experiencing, right? You've branched way beyond this.
We have, and I guess what we're all about at KidsCan is, education equals opportunity, and we want children and young people to be able to get to school and learn. But what schools have been telling us is that children get to school and they've got other worries, and these include personal hygiene. So no access to deodorant, toothbrushes, shampoo, conditioner, shower gel, those really basic things that you really need to be able to start your day and get to work or get to school in a good space, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely, with self-esteem intact and an ability to sit beside people in your class, right, without someone holding their nose. So
have a teacher come and look at your work, and if you don't have good personal hygiene, and so children are really aware of this. So it's such an important part of learning, I guess.
So these families, these homes, are so short of money that there is sometimes a lack of very basic cleanliness products like soap, like shampoo, like deodorant.
Yeah, and I think that surprises some people, and I guess to a point it surprised me. I was like, it's not that much to buy a bottle of shampoo. But then I went and calculated it, and I went onto the Warehouse website, so we're not talking, we're talking good products, but not overly expensive product. And I worked out that it's probably about $20 to $25 a term to supply a child with those really basic items that we talked about. And if you've got 4 children, that's hundreds and hundreds of dollars a year. So it actually really does add up to be quite a big expense.
And so you are now getting demand. Is this coming to you through the schools?
Absolutely. Everything that KidsCan does is driven by schools' needs.
And this is demand through the schools for deodorants, shampoos and soaps?
Yep, really basic items. And I guess the flow-on effect of these things are quite serious. One of the examples that public health nurses often give to us is, in New Zealand, so many children are hospitalised for skin conditions that are totally avoidable. And one of the best things that we can do around prevention is showing children how to cut their nails and how to clean their nails with a nail brush. And so that's also part of what we want to give families is a pair of nail clippers and a nail brush. And I know it's not rocket science, but it actually will reduce hospitalisation.
Julia, you say, I know it's not rocket science. Every time, wherever I've worked, I've had a discussion like this with someone like you. People immediately contact us afterwards and say, what is up with the parents here? This is a no-brainer. Surely cutting nails and providing soap is part of what every parent does. What's your response to that?
Children don't choose who their parents are, is my truthful response to that. And every child born in New Zealand has to have the opportunity to go to school and learn. And so I don't think it's my place to say what parents should and shouldn't do. My focus is those children.
Julia Hayden-Carr from KidsCan. The French President Francois Hollande has joined hundreds at a mass at the Notre Dame Cathedral to honour the 85-year-old priest who was killed in a knife attack earlier this week. Paul Chapman reports.
French President Francois Hollande was among those to attend this Mass at Notre Dame Cathedral to honour the priest killed in Tuesday's church attack. He was one of several top, serving and former politicians to pay their respects amid tight security. Father Jacques Hamel, who was 85, was forced to his knees by the two attackers who slit his throat. Hundreds turned out for the Mass, including religious leaders of other faiths. The Archbishop of Paris called for hope in the face of despair.
C'est cette espérance au cœur de l'épreuve qui bat.
It is this hope at the heart of the challenge which forever bars the path of despair, of vengeance and of death. It is this hope that animated the ministry of Father Jacques Hamel when he celebrated the Eucharists, during which he was savagely executed.
The two attackers were shot dead as they left the church after Tuesday's bloodshed. One's been identified as 19-year-old Adel Kamish, who was known to intelligence services after two attempts to reach Syria. The identity of the second killer was still unclear on Thursday.
9.5 to 6. The controversy over the sale of thousands of Tongan passports has dominated the first day of the Tongan Prime Minister's visit to New Zealand. Prime Minister John Campbell has welcomed Akalisi Pohiva in Auckland today on his first diplomatic visit. Mr Pohiva promised John Campbell his country was taking action after charging at least 12 people this year, including a former police officer and Chinese nationals. The practice has seen thousands of passports sold over the past 25 years. RNZ International's Alex Perrottet was at Government House and filed this report.
Mr Pohiva's first state visit comes during his second year in power, and he made a delicate diplomatic point when asked why it had taken so long, saying it's a question that should be put to Mr Key. But a pressing concern between the nations is the alleged sale of diplomatic passports, which are strictly reserved to high-ranking government officials and can be used to obtain diplomatic immunity. Mr Pohiva says authorities are struggling to rein in corruption.
There has been a continued sales of Tongan passport, and this is a very serious case, and our government is working very hard. That is an indication of corruption, law and order. The rule of law is very weak for quite some time.
Last year, the King of Tonga approved a royal commission to investigate the scandal. The Prime Minister, John Campbell, says it's a pressing concern.
As Prime Minister said, it's a serious matter. They are dealing with the issue, and New Zealand needs the issue to be dealt with because these are passports which are, in theory, they're not fake passports, and we need to have the confidence in the system that a passport that's issued by the Tongan government is legitimate.
Mr Key says it's the most sacrosanct legal document, and there's a risk that New Zealand loses confidence in Tongan passports. Mr Pohiva also admits the country is facing serious economic difficulties in dealing with massive debt and trying to convert foreign aid into successful projects. He describes the problem with a curious analogy, comparing those threats to ninjas.
It's not easy in a small society like Tonga, where values and culture, they are really some constraints. One must have the courage to challenge or even try to remove these constraints before we can. There are ninjas all along. You can kill one ninja and another ninja. There are a lot of ninjas.
Akalisi Pohiva will also be visiting Tongan fruit pickers in the country, praised by John Campbell as essential to the industry. For Checkpoint, Alex Perrottet.
Hundreds of high school students and their supporters are in Hawke's Bay this week, stamping loudly and singing like tui as they compete at the National Secondary Schools Kapa Haka Festival. The competition started 16 years ago and many haka exponents say the level of performances have just got better and better over the years. Our Te Manu Korehi reporter Shannon Haunui Thompson is there.
The boys of Hatopaora only had one thing to say to those who tried to stop them from doing the poi, and they said it on the stage. The boys' only school proved they can do the poi just as well as any girl, and the crowd loved it. 39 schools are competing and each team has 40 performers. That's over 1,500 rangatahi on stage. Paraone Gloin of Te Wānanga o Aotearoa says thousands of hours go into preparing for each performance like a sports team, but they only have one chance to get it right.
The difference with kapahaka, a big competition like this, the groups have put all their heart, soul, blood, sweat and tears into 30 minutes on stage, and some of them make it 60. Once they perform, that's it. There's no going back. They can't say, well, we can do this next time we perform.
He says a lot of work goes into each performance on stage and behind the scenes.
You don't just pull a composition out of air. Not just the writing of the composition, but the research that goes into it. So I've been listening to all the items, and some of them, they are thoroughly researched. And then there's the cooks, the sewers, that have stayed up at night sewing their pari and getting the uniforms together, the parents that have driven them to and all of that. So that's all the time that goes into kapahaka.
One parent, Hera Douglas, says her son has practiced for hours with his group.
There's just a lot of whānau who come in and out of the kura to help. Usually they'll have nohos every weekend, probably for the last 10 weeks. And then lunchtimes they'll usually do practice as well. At night time, they'll be practicing at night time too.
She says there are many benefits for her son and his friends.
Camaraderie that they get, the experience. It's about strengthening their relationships as friends. I just think it's a really good opportunity for them to work together and to learn new things together.
The top 9 groups who'll perform in the finals tomorrow will be announced later on this evening. I te mātaua Māui mo te hōtaka o te ahi ahi, ko Shannon Haunui Thompson tēnei.
It's 4 minutes to 6 on Checkpoint. Hundreds of people queued for hours on Wellington's Lambton Quay this morning, desperate to get inside the new David Jones department store. Developers have spent $20 million refitting the old Kirkaldy and Staines, which closed due to falling sales and years of losses. An institution, Kirk's was. It's the first David Jones to open outside of Australia. Alex Ashton's report begins with some very eager shoppers.
Well, we've been planning to do this for maybe 2 months, 3 months, and Meredith and I were good friends, so we just decided to make a day of it. We're going to start from the ground and go all the way to the top. We're going to spend some time in the cafe.
Catherine Duffin and Meredith Collinson turned up to David Jones at 5:45 this morning. They were among hundreds who braved the cold and wet to queue for hours to get into the new department store.
It's sort of pretty exciting for Wellington to get something like this. Usually the cool stuff goes to Auckland, so we thought we'd get amongst all the excitement down here and line up.
Ruth was another lining up.
Well, I lived in Australia for over 20 years and I used to love David Jones. It was my favourite store. It was the only store credit card I had. Unfortunately, they haven't got those here yet. And I've been waiting for this for 15 years since I came back. It's the most beautiful store in the world, and I've got it in my diary at work that I've had a meeting with Mr. Jones, and here I am to meet with him.
David Jones' move to Wellington's Golden Mile is being touted by the city's leaders as a sign of a thriving economy. The store replaces the former institution, Kirkaldy and Staines, which shut up shop for good last year after more than 150 years in business. The end of an era for some, but for those lining up on opening day, the sadness seemed outweighed by excitement.
I think I was sad to see it go because it's such an important feature in Wellington shopping, but David Jones has sort of taken on Kirk's and sort of progressed it.
Zach Andrews was there to buy cologne.
The buzz has been huge. There's advertising everywhere. All of my friends are unbelievably excited to come in. I think it's going to do wonders for the CBD.
David Jones management says many former Kirk staff members are still working at the store, but it didn't specify just how many it had kept on. For Checkpoint, ko Alex Ashton tēnei.
The time is about a minute and a half away from 6. We've got lots of feedback tonight, so we're going to give you a sample of it. This is an email from Terry, who says, I'd like to congratulate and encourage those people who took up the offer of $5,000 to move away from Auckland. That's the spirit of our ancestors coming through. They were people who took risks and left their families and homelands to make a new life in a place that offered better things, opportunities for them to own land, have better jobs and forge a new life in a smaller community. Many of them prospered, although they didn't have email or Skype or even regular postal services to connect them with their families. families. They were incredibly brave, but many of their descendants have forgotten the sacrifices they made to give us the lives we have today. Good on those families for seizing an opportunity when it was presented. Kim from Kapiti says, how come this country taxes food and sanitary products but doesn't tax landlord rental income? Vicky says, girls without feminine hygiene products and kids without personal hygiene products. What are we, a third world country? And this listener from Wellington says, I feel unbelievably sad for C, who cries herself to sleep, a hard-working, loving mother who's constantly struggling. I found myself crying as I drove home to my own home in Wellington. Thank you so much for your feedback. We do appreciate hearing from you. If you want to be in touch, you can text us on 2101. You can email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. And also, don't forget, we have an excellent Facebook page, which is getting lots and lots of visitors, and we appreciate hearing from you. Kia ora everyone, you are with Checkpoint on RNZ National on the radio, as always, also screening live on Freeview Channel 50 and streaming live on the RNZ website. However you're joining us, thank you for doing so. Tonight, outgoing Crusaders rugby coach Todd Blackadder, one of the nicest men in rugby, has announced he's heading to England, having signed a 3-year deal with clubside Bath. The Christchurch City Council bans freedom campers forever. The New Zealand men's rowing 4 won't compete at the Rio Olympics. They've had a tough time, those guys. And a new study reveals that despite a rapid rise in online media platforms, radio and TV are still our nation's favourite forms of media. But first, here is RNZ News with Katrina Batten.
Ngā mihi nui, good evening. An emergency housing provider says take-up of the government's relocation scheme is drastically lower than expected. People living in or waiting for social housing in Auckland have been offered grants of up to $5,000 if they move out of the city. In the scheme's first month, 12 people have been given grants and 10 more are in the pipeline for payment. A spokesman for the Monte Cecilia Housing Trust, Bernie Smith, says he thought 5 times as many would have taken the offer because more than 100 people registered their interest.
I'm not sure how they're going to promote it further to get the numbers anywhere near that, and if we've got 12 in the first month, we're probably lucky to get another couple of dozen between now and Christmas at this rate.
Bernie Smith says despite the tiny number, at least some people are in a better situation. Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama have hugged and clasped hands on the stage of the Democratic Party convention in Philadelphia after Mr. Obama delivered a rousing speech in support of her for the presidency. The president told delegates no one is more qualified to be in the Oval Office than Mrs. Clinton. The BBC's Kim Gathas is at the convention.
This was an extraordinary speech by President Obama. People are saying that this is probably his best speech since he first came onto the national stage in 2004, addressing the Democratic Convention in that year. This was not just an endorsement of Hillary Clinton, and certainly it was a full-throttled endorsement. It was a heartfelt, forceful endorsement, but it was also his way of painting an image of the America that he believes in, the image of an America that he believes can continue to be in a post-Obama era.
Kim Hatas in Philadelphia. The Mayor of Christchurch wants councils around the country to unite with the government in making freedom camping laws consistent throughout the country. The Christchurch City Council today voted in favour of making permanent a temporary ban on campers without toilets in their vans. Before the vote, Leanne Dalzell says local camping grounds have been feeling the impact of freedom camping.
I've got an anecdotal response from South New Brighton. They said that it was a 30% reduction in their normal usage, and their usage hadn't gone down since the earthquakes until we brought in the freedom camping bylaw.
Leanne Dalzell. The council's decision now goes out for consultation. An immunisation expert says chicken pox can make children very sick, but now it will be possible to prevent it. The drug buying agency Pharmac says from July next year, a chicken pox vaccine will be funded for all children as part of the childhood immunisation schedule. Up till now, it's only been funded for high-risk patients, arrangements for whom will remain unchanged. The Director of Research at the Immunisation Advisory Centre, Helen Pertussis-Harris, says it's fantastic news and about time.
Every year there are about 55,000 cases of chickenpox in New Zealand and about 450 hospitalisations, and that includes some admissions to intensive care. So it can make people really sick, and now we can prevent it, which is great.
Helen Pertussis-Harris says when other countries have introduced the vaccine, chickenpox has largely disappeared. The animal rights group, whose secret filming of bobby calves being mistreated resulted in a man being prosecuted, says it would have preferred a more restorative sentence. Noel Erickson has been sentenced in the Huntly District Court to 10 months home detention and 200 hours community work. A Farm Watch spokesperson, John Derrick, says the sentence shows animal abuse has been taken seriously. However, he questions the need for home detention.
It's not what I was hoping for. What I really think people who abuse animals need is help, and I certainly don't think Erickson being stuck at home for 10 months is going to help him or the community or animals. So I would have much preferred some kind of maybe restorative help to other where he got some help. I'm not a big fan of punishing people. I think where possible we should be working in a restorative manner.
John Derrick says he would have been disappointed had Erickson been sent to jail. Lawyers for a residential special school say its enrolments are being limited by rules that could breach the Bill of Rights Act. Salisbury School in Nelson has just 9 students, down from about 80 5 years ago, and is facing closure. Enrolments are limited to girls deemed to have challenging behaviour, as well as an intellectual disability or autism. The school's board has published legal advice that the behaviour requirement could be discriminatory because it prevents many disabled girls from enrolling. The ministry says it rejects any suggestion its eligibility criteria are discriminatory. To sport, and the outgoing Crusaders coach Todd Blackadder hopes his new job at English club Bath will mean less time in the spotlight. He says while he'll miss the Crusaders' setup and friendships, there are some things he certainly won't miss.
The scrutiny at times, it can get very personal, and which is just part of the job, but it's the darker side of it, and it probably affects your family a lot more. So I'm looking forward to getting out of the spotlight a little bit, and sort of I think probably more my family will be pleased as well, because some of the stuff out there can be pretty brutal and nasty.
Todd Blackadder has signed a 3-year deal with Bath and will take up the job next month. Meanwhile, the Wallabies player Digby Ioane has signed with the Crusaders for 2 years. The New Zealand-born, Australian-raised winger has already played 86 Super Rugby games, mostly for the Queensland Reds. The New Zealand cricketers don't want to give Zimbabwe a sniff of success in the 2-test series starting in Bulawayo tonight. The Black Caps, ranked 5th in the world, are heavily favoured to beat the unranked Zimbabweans who last played a test in 2014. Captain Kane Williamson says they'll stick with their attacking approach, and while the home side is more familiar with the local conditions, he feels his side can adapt quickly. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, military metaphors and medicine. Are they helping us to win the battle against disease? See, I'm just doing one myself. Or are we destroying the village to save it? Simon Morris reviews the latest Star Trek movie. There's a window on the world of modern yoga, more Scandinavian than Indian, perhaps. And part 1 of a historic walking tour of central Auckland from Merrill Drive to K Road on Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met service weather to midnight tomorrow, Northland to Kapiti Coast, including Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. Showers, some heavy with hail and possible thunderstorms, easing and becoming isolated south of Whanganui in the morning and elsewhere later. Snow about the Desert Road in the morning. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay mainly fine, but isolated showers spreading from the ranges at times. Wellington and Wairarapa isolated showers, possibly heavy in the north today, retreating to coastal Wairarapa tomorrow.
Western Nelson, Buller, Westland and Fiordland, periods of rain with squally thunderstorms and hail until morning. Snow lowering to 200 metres in Fiordland overnight. The remainder of Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury mainly fine but isolated showers till this evening. Otago and Southland fine at first, showers with cold southwesterlies spreading north overnight and snow lowering to 200 metres, then clearing from the north later tomorrow. And the Chatham Islands, periods of rain, some heavy with hail tomorrow, gale southwesterlies also tomorrow. It's coming up to 6:09.
Thanks very much, Katrina. Great T-shirt. Freedom campers travelling without toilets on board could be permanently banned from Christchurch. City councillors today voted in favour of keeping what was initially a temporary restriction in place. The ban was introduced after last year's bylaw failed to control an influx of visitors and led to overcrowding and conflict with local residents in some places. Here's our Christchurch local government reporter, Conan Young.
The council today voted for a permanent ban on all forms of camping at 5 locations previously set aside for that purpose and an area-wide ban for those without a toilet. The councillor, Phil Clearwater, welcomes the move but says when the bylaw is reviewed, the city should consider how to provide for freedom campers in the future.
Somehow or other, we have to be proactive in looking at how we use our own current camping grounds and also how we actually may need to make some other facilities available for freedom campers, because clearly freedom campers too should contribute their share of the costs to this, not just ratepayers.
His colleague Yanni Johansson has questioned whether the ban is enforceable, and he says last summer's disaster might have been entirely of the council's own making.
The problem was that when we identified sites without the infrastructure, then suddenly we created a place where people could easily target to go camping, and obviously that has led to a number of issues.
The Mayor, Leanne Dalzell, asked staff to disclose what impacts the bylaw had had on local camping grounds.
I've got an anecdotal response from South New Brighton. They said that it was a 30% reduction in their normal usage, and their usage hadn't gone down since the earthquakes until we brought in the Freedom Camping bylaw.
Ms Dalzell says she wants to see a combined approach to freedom camping by councils across the country, and she says the government needs to step in and amend the law.
Because you can't tell a tourist coming into New Zealand, we've got one set of rules in this council, another set of rules in that council, one set of rules in the South Island, another set in the North Island, one set of rules for dockland and another set of rules for council land, and by the way, you can't tell the difference between them.
But the Prime Minister, John Key, who is also the Tourism Minister, has already shunted the issue firmly back to the councils.
And if they are collectively as a group saying, look, there should be one standard for freedom camping, that's probably a very good idea, but they don't need the government to make them do it. If they want to do it, they should just hold hands and do it.
The proposed ban will now be sent out for public feedback before the council makes a final decision. In Ōtautahi for Checkpoint, ko Conan Young tēnei.
We're going to stay in Christchurch because there is, well, breaking sports news really. The outgoing Crusaders rugby coach Todd Blackadder is heading to England, having signed a 3-year deal with club side Bath. Tabai Matson, who was Blackadder's assistant coach at the Crusaders, is joining him there, having signed a 4-year deal with the club. Blackadder's 8-year coaching stint with the Crusaders came to an end when the side lost to the Lions in the Super Rugby quarterfinals in South Africa at the weekend. He spoke to our sports editor, Stephen Hewson, about what he'll miss and what he won't.
One thing I'm really looking forward to is just the structure of the competition. I think it'll be really quite different without travel of Super Rugby and all the challenges that poses. So that's quite attractive as well.
What else do you think is going to be the biggest difference for you?
Oh, I think just the style of play in the conditions. I think it'll be quite different. You know, Super Rugby's open running rugby, and just sometimes over there with the weather conditions, it'll be different, and the style of the game will be slightly different. So just making sure that you don't create too much change. It's not Super Rugby. It's in the Premiership, and that'll have its different challenges. But a really good challenge as a coach.
What were your other options? Did you put your hand up for the Queensland Reds job?
I certainly had a couple of discussions earlier on with the Reds, and that was a really attractive offer. But first things first, the Bath job was on the table. So I've sort of known it for over a month now that I'd signed, and that's where I was going, and I just didn't want it released with all the speculation. I didn't want to be a distraction for the team this year while we were trying to win this competition.
So were you offered the Reds job, were you?
No, just initial discussions.
Longer term, I mean, Steve Chew's obviously talked about the next All Black coach possibly being involved or likely to be involved in the 2019 World Cup campaign. This contract goes for 3 years. Is that part of your long-term goal, the top job?
Oh, I think one day, but for me it's just really around going away for 3 years, still learning and developing and, hope to come back as a better coach. And that's what the wonderful thing about the opportunity that I've had for the last 8 years with the Crusaders was to, I've really developed and I've really learned, and I feel like I'm a better coach now than what I've ever been. So I'm looking forward to that. But no, I wouldn't say that that's part of the plan. I just think 3 years over at Bath would be good, and if I decide to come home then, it will be to come back to coach back in New Zealand again. It could be a Mitre 10 Cup team or still involved with Super Rugby or even as an assistant.
How tough is it going away from the Crusaders without having won a Super Rugby title?
Oh, it does feel tough, but we gave ourselves every chance. We've been to a couple of finals, just not quite good enough on the day, or, the rub of the green or a little bit of luck just hasn't gone our way. But you can only give yourself, you can only say that we gave it absolutely everything we could, and I certainly did that. And that's just life, I suppose.
What are you going to miss most?
What I really miss is the coaches, and the friendships that we've developed. And, all those little things that make the difference because we've put a hell of a lot of work into it and haven't always got the rewards for the management team, the organisation that I know that they deserve. There's some things that I won't miss either, I can promise you that.
Which are?
Oh, just the scrutiny at times. It can get very personal, and which is just part of the job, but it's the darker side of it, and it probably affects your family a lot more. So I'm looking forward to getting out of the spotlight a little bit, and sort of, I think probably more my family will be pleased as well, because some of the stuff out there can be pretty brutal and nasty.
Todd Blackett talking to Stephen Houston. I'm just looking at Bath Rugby's website where they've just announced the news that they have obtained Todd Blackadder's services, and they are very delighted and proud that he is going there. It's 6:15. Prison reform proponents are frustrated that Human Era is being blamed for a prisoner's private information being sent to the wrong victim. The parole board has apologised to the woman and has pointed the finger at a staff member for sending her a parole ruling on an inmate not related to her case. But some advocates say that's just not good enough. Michael Kropp reports.
Earlier this month, a woman whose name is suppressed opened an envelope with a parole ruling on the man who raped her in 2004, but also included was extra paperwork on an inmate who was not related to her case. She says the slip-up has left her shocked, panicked and paranoid about the details of her own case being misdirected in the mail. The chairperson of Just Speak, Julia Whaiporti, says while prisoners give up many rights, privacy is not one of them.
People in prison are at the liberty of the state. They have no control over what's happening. And their information, they still have a right to privacy. Their information is held by the parole board, by corrections, by justice, and they should have the confidence that that information isn't going to be shared inappropriately.
Ms. Whaiporti says the onus is on the state to make sure it protects the private information of prisoners and victims, and the failure to do that risks the confidence of the public.
If this has happened in this instance, that it's a natural response for the public to go, oh, well, what else has been shared for us? Whether that's rational, whether that's statistically likely or otherwise, of course that would knock a public confidence in the processes that people's privacy is going to be protected.
The Labour Party's corrections spokesperson Calvin Davis says it's unacceptable, yet it's becoming all too common.
We had this situation a year or so back where I think it was MSD sharing and ACC sharing people's information, private information. It's just unacceptable. Agencies shouldn't be doing this in this day and age. They should be more careful with people's information.
Mr Davis says sensitive documents must be double-checked before they're sent out, and the parole board needs to go through its records to make sure this was a one-off. And he says the board should extend its apology to the prisoner.
Regardless of the fact that the person is in prison, they're entitled to certain amounts of privacy, and having their private information sent out to a stranger is unacceptable. So, I mean, it doesn't have to be a big, long-winded apology, but just, say sorry, and we'll take steps to make sure it doesn't happen again.
The Corrections Department says it provides some administrative support to the Parole Board, but it was not responsible for the breach. The Parole Board says it can release any hearing outcomes as a matter of public record, but this was a mistake, as the names and details were not redacted. It says it deals with about 8,500 hearings each year, and its primary concern is to make sure the victim's information is not released. It says it's not aware of any similar breaches. For Checkpoint, Michael Cropternay.
The New Zealand men's rowing four won't compete at the Rio Olympics. Now, Russia has confirmed it will put together a crew for the event. The team have been on standby training at Lake Karapiro after rowing's world governing body, FISA, said the New Zealand four would be given the spot if Russia decided not to enter. Early this week, the International Olympic Committee stopped short of handing Russia a blanket ban from the Games, despite evidence of state-sponsored doping. So with all the recent revelations and the IOC's Russian sidestep, how clean can we expect the Olympics to be? Joe Porter reports.
The IOC chose not to ban Russia outright from Rio, instead giving individual sports governing bodies the responsibility to decide if the athletes can compete. The move has been slammed by anti-doping agencies and athletes around the world, with the chief executive of Drug Free Sport New Zealand, Graham Steele, labelling it weak and extremely disappointing.
The IOC has said earlier this year that international sporting federations should not be involved in anti-doping work. They are conflicted, and now in almost the same breath he's saying we'll give responsibility back to them.
The World Rowing Federation came down strong, slashing the Russian Olympic rowing team from 26 athletes to 6. But the International Judo Federation, which lists the Russian President Vladimir Putin as its honorary president, has allowed Russians to participate. Russia is expected to have more than 250 athletes at the Olympics, and convicted drug cheats from other countries who've already served their bans will compete too. That raises the question, will there be any current dopers in Rio? Graham Steele says yes, and some of them will win.
It's clear from what we've seen from Russia and what we know about doping that's happening in other countries that athletes are still doping and some of them are getting away with it. So some athletes in Rio will succeed and they will have doped to do that.
The former head of the World Anti-Doping Agency, New Zealand's David Howman, agrees.
Would you go to an Olympic Games and cheat because you're sure of getting a gold medal, but you're probably going to die before you're 25? And a high percentage actually say yes, they will. So you've got to balance that sort of information, that knowledge you've got from research against your hopes.
The problem is so bad, a former New Zealand Olympian is calling for all athletes who win medals alongside Russians not to stand on the podium during the medal ceremony. Moss Burmester, who swam at the 2004 and 2008 Games, says doping runs deep and clean athletes feel powerless to stop it.
Not just the Russians, it's rife throughout sport, and certain sports, and the athletes who are in there who are clean, they can look around the sport and the marshalling rooms and they know who the dirty athletes are, but they just can't speak out about it.
One of the New Zealand athletes almost robbed of his Olympic place is 31-year-old Greg Miller, who claimed his spot after the suspension of an Australian wrestler. Miller works full-time, spent $15,000 of his own money and committed to 15 years of training trying to get to Rio, only to almost have his dream dashed by a doper.
That would have been something that haunted me the rest of my life had I missed out on someone who ultimately was banned from the Olympics.
So if Rio isn't clean, will any Olympics ever be? Former WADA boss Howman doubts it.
Some are persuaded to cheat and cheat for the hope that they're going to achieve immortality and fame. Those psychological, personal, human things haven't altered. The whole process of collecting urine and blood is fraught with human fragility because you rely so much on humans to do the work. And at each stage of that, you've got the possibility of someone being corrupted, paid off.
Howman says crime is involved in 25% of world sport and says where there's money to be made, there will always be doping and corruption. The Rio Olympics appear to be no different. For Checkpoint, Joe Porter.
A new study reveals TV and radio are still the nation's favourite forms of media despite the rapid rise and popularity of online platforms. The New Zealand On Air survey measured what media audiences consume and how consumption has changed since 2014. It's using the result to work out how to distribute $80 million in funding each year. Eva Corlett asks people about their favourite media.
Watch TV, listen to the radio quite often, yeah. I like watching the news, just keeping up with current events and watching the programs that I like.
Just TV, because it's easy, it's convenient. I don't spend a lot of time on the computer.
Yeah, TV, visuals that go with it. There's, seeing the picture helps the story.
Get up-to-date news. Not everybody can go online.
But those trends are changing. Many Aucklanders, young and old, seem to be switching to online.
I don't really watch TV anymore. I don't have time for TV. Everything is on my phone, even my laptop, I don't use it. Everything on the go, basically.
I kind of go on TVNZ on demand, or it's Netflix, kind of things that I can do in my own time, rather than waiting for it to come on TV. It's quite inconvenient.
I look online too, on YouTube, and look up songs that I like, because my era was the 70s and the 80s, so I look up all the old school kind of music that I like.
I search what I want rather than being fed a certain media outlet's interpretation of the news.
It's probably the most accessible. It's just kind of whenever you want it, you don't have to wait for when it's convenient.
TV and radio may still draw the largest audience numbers, but the gap between traditional and online media is closing. The study also found that audiences using online media, like YouTube and subscription video on demand, has jumped dramatically, by as much as 15% in 2 years for online videos via YouTube and Facebook. Jeremy Todd from Glasshouse Consulting says the generational divide is partly responsible for the changing nature of media.
Amongst 15 to 39-year-olds, more 15 to 39s are watching online video each day than are watching linear TV. More for 15 to 39-year-olds are watching music streamed than are listening to the radio. 38% tune into SVOD each day. Now that is a stark difference to 2014.
NZ On Air's Chief Executive, Jane Wrightson, says the findings will mean fundamental changes to how content is funded. Ms Wrightson says investment will remain mostly in traditional media, with space for online, but audience behaviour will be monitored closely.
We must carefully diversify our investments. You'll have seen this happening over the last couple of years, in particular as we've carefully experimented with web series and other digital media projects. But in the coming year we'll be adapting further and at greater pace. New Zealand On Air is currently carrying out a fundamental review of our funding strategy, and this research is one set of very important information that helps us in setting a future path.
Jane Wrightson says there is still a hunger for local stories, which remains a strong point of difference against global content. NZ On Air will announce its funding strategy later this year. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Eva Corlett tēnei.
Kia ora, Eva. High demand for housing in Auckland is a story we are all familiar with, but it's being mirrored nearly 3,000 kilometres away on the island of Niue, almost on a smaller scale, we have to say. A recent increase in tourism to the island has prompted the building of new houses for tourists and expats returning to the island, people going home to Niue. It's good news for Niue, which has suffered from depopulation. But as Daniela Moate Cox reports, a broken supply ship means the building process hasn't been entirely smooth sailing.
Work and education opportunities overseas have long drawn Niueans away from the island, but additional flights and changes to superannuation access for Niueans living in New Zealand have been introduced in recent years to bring people back. The Secretary to Government, Richard Heeper, says the construction of new housing is a sign its investment in tourism is working.
Largely we are promoting the private sector, and there is opportunity now in the private sector with tourism-related opportunities. So this has been a long-term planning, and we are starting to see the tangible results, very good results on Niue.
Less than 2,000 people live in Niue, but Mr Heeper says its infrastructure is designed to handle thousands of visitors, which almost reached 10,000 last year. He says the residing population may be small, but more people are making the decision to settle and build in Niue. This includes third-generation Niueans living in New Zealand, whom the High Commissioner to New Zealand, Olaf Jacobson, says are keen to trace their origins.
Looking at something like 20,000 plus Niueans living here in New Zealand and so few living on Niue. So how else can you make these people go back? And if this is one way of taking them back as a draw card to bringing our people back home, they need to have somewhere to live, they need to have something to do, they need to earn some money to keep them. And if this is the way that it's heading, I think it's a wonderful thing that's happening.
Niue MP Terry Coe says the increased number of returning expats makes sense, given the housing market in New Zealand.
A lot of people are having problems in New Zealand renting property, and so it's cheaper in the long run to come here, build the house, and not have to pay rent and water rates, etc., that you need to pay in New Zealand.
Terry Coe says he's noticed about 10 new houses being built in various villages throughout the island, but a broken cargo boat has delayed the delivery of materials and held up construction for nearly a month. He says there's no cement, timber, fittings or wallboards, and people are stuck halfway through building their houses.
People who are coming up to build houses need to, do the building and get back to New Zealand to get to their jobs, and not coming here and then have to go back and then come back again when the materials arrive.
Mr Coe says shifting the supplies onto another boat or reordering the supplies isn't viable, and most people will just have to wait till the next boat arrives in late August. For Checkpoint, ko Daniela Mawate Cox Tine.
Kia ora, Daniela, ending our show for tonight, but some feedback coming in. It's been a really interesting program tonight because we've had all the ends of the income spectrum, really. We've had the NBR Rich List, we've had the big David Jones opening day in Wellington, and of course we've had people desperately trying to save for a deposit and actually not managing to do so because the cost of living is so high in Auckland. Abby says, hope all the people at David Jones are buying a bar of soap for the kids. Such unbelievably sad disparity in our country. That was a story about KidsCan now. Giving soap and deodorants and shampoos to schools for children who are not getting access to them at home. And parents are busy, hard working. They haven't noticed their kids' nails need cutting or their hair needs a wash. Who is looking out for these kids? It will come back to bite us. Lots of feedback on those stories tonight. Thank you all. Thank you for listening. We really are delighted to have your company, of course. Tomorrow night on Checkpoint, a rather special group of visitors from Dunedin, the Syrian refugees who arrived there 3 months ago. We're going to ask them how they're liking life in New Zealand and in the South. We'll see you tomorrow night at 5, we hope. Until then, ka kite anō and a very good evening indeed.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The government has paid out 12 applicants so far to relocate from Auckland to help free up social housing. Barack Obama has told Democratic delegates no one is more qualified to be in the Oval Office than Hillary Clinton. Christchurch's mayor wants councils to unite with the government in making freedom camping laws consistent throughout the country. Pharmac has widened access to the HPV and chickenpox vaccines. A Waikato man who admitted ill-treating bobby calves has been given 10 months home detention and 200 hours community work. And a man is on the run after an armed robbery in Waihi today. Our next news and weather is at 7.
You'll need to bring plenty of warm clothes, good boots and wet weather gear and a bit of food and a sleeping bag, and be prepared to rough it.
Country Life this week goes after the New Zealand Big Four, a pig, trout, pheasant and deer. And it's not just animals that'll be captured.
Yes,